70,000 people are here, and Bob Dylan is the reason for it.
Inspired by their true story.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on a stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
Make some noise, BD.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro. A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Hey, it's Shannon from C-SPAN, back with the final episode of our special series on the history of baseball. Today, we're stepping up to one of the most significant chapters in the sport's story. Professor Donald Spivey takes us into the world of Satchel Paige and the Negro Leagues, where the love of the game intersected with the fight for civil rights. Satchel Paige, a legendary pitcher and the first Negro Leagues player inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, was more than just a baseball icon. He and other players and owners challenged Jim Crow laws, supported civil rights organizations like the NAACP, and built bridges with Major League Baseball's white players, all while redefining what was possible on and off the field. Professor Spivey gave this lecture at the University of Miami in 2014. More after this.
As the year ends, we need your help to keep democracy accessible to everyone. 100% of your tax-deductible gift supports C-SPAN's work, giving you unfiltered access to your government. For decades, C-SPAN has brought you straightforward, unbiased coverage, free from ads and partisan spin. But we can't do it without you. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your gift today. Give now to protect democracy unfiltered in 2025 and beyond. Thank you for your support, and don't forget, visit cspan.org/donate to help keep this mission going.
We'll be talking today about Satchel Paige and Negro Leagues baseball and the rethinking of the civil rights movement. Let me first of all start out with a confession to you that for the longest I avoided, like the plague, any teaching of the civil rights movement. It didn't make sense to me. I'm a baby boomer. I was born at the end of World War II. I came of age in the 1950s and 60s, so all of this were current events. So why, as a historian, present something that's current? My mind changed in 2001. Let me tell you what happened in 2001. I had the great privilege to serve as moderator for a session on pastime, baseball is history, at the OAH, the Organization of American Historians. And the session was focusing on Jules Tygel's new book, same title, Pastime Baseball as History. And we had a great panel with Stanley Cutler from University of Wisconsin, James Marin from Princeton University, and Jules, obviously, from San Francisco State, and then our surprise anchor person, Sharon Robinson, head of and founder of Jackie's Nine and the daughter of Jackie Robinson. And we had a great session. It was well attended. But at the end of the session, I had a chance to chat with Sharon Robinson. And we were both concerned about a very recent news article that had a star baseball player of color, right, who in the interview, it was mentioned to him something to the effect of, well, I guess you're really, you thank goodness for Jackie Robinson. And the player said, who's Jackie Robinson? And what it became very clear to us was that many of the Major League Baseball players did not know who Jackie Robinson was. And so not just them, but the public as well. So Sharon Robinson said she's going to do something about it, and she did. She met with the baseball commissioner, Bud Selig, who's still commissioner, right? And they came up with an idea, and that idea is Jackie Robinson Day, which occurs every April 15th, which was the day Jackie was brought up in Brooklyn in his first game, April 15th. The first Jackie Robinson Day was 2004. And so this year we will celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Jackie Robinson Day. And so it dawned on me, I said, yeah, I've got to teach the civil rights movement. I've got to teach sport and relate it to that movement. Because if Jackie Robinson was here today, I have no doubt he'd come right to this podium and tell you that the history of that great day for him did not begin then, that you have to look back to the great ball players that came long before Jackie Robinson. And he would say Moses Fleetwood Walker was the first black in Major League Baseball back in 1884. And he said, in paving the way, leading the way for me, Jackie Robinson would say, you've got to understand the great players of the Negro Leagues, and especially the king of the Negro Leagues, Leroy Robert Satchel Paige. None other than Satchel Paige. You've got to understand him because he paved the way. Many will say of Satchel Paige, he was the world's greatest pitcher. I certainly agree with that. Some of the testimonials, Joe DiMaggio, when he was first starting out, and he was playing against black ball players in the California Winter League, and this happened. You'd have star white players playing against black players out there in California, and he got a hit off Satchel Paige. And when he got back to his teammates, he told them, now I know I'm ready for the major leagues because I got a hit off Satchel Paige. And the great DiMaggio, at the end of his career, without hesitation, when he was asked who was the greatest pitcher you ever faced, he said Satchel Paige. Dizzy Dean, by far, I think, the leading pitcher in the major leagues prior to World War II, he had many barnstorming battles with Satchel Paige, right? And they made a lot of money together out there, barnstorming through the West and the plains and so forth. Dizzy Dean said of Satchel Paige, Dean, who was known for his fastball, he said, my fastball looks like a change of pace next to that bullet that Satchel throws. And Dean went on to his radio program and said, you know, I don't know why they keep these colored boys out of the majors, because if me and Satchel was on the same team, we'd have the pennant won by 4th of July and go fishing to World Series time. Right. Bill Veeck, who I think is the most innovative owner in Major League Baseball, owner of the Cleveland Indians, and then the St. Louis Browns, and then the Miami Marlins when they were in the National League, and then the Chicago White Sox. Bill Veeck put it this way and said it in his radio broadcast, and it's also in his papers. He made the point numerous times. He said, and I quote, if Satchel Paige had been allowed to play in the majors and in his prime, today's Cy Young Award would be known as the Satchel Paige Award. What made Satchel Paige so special? When I interviewed bunches of the Negro League players, they basically said the same thing. He was a born entertainer. Satchel Paige always believed that it was more than just great athletic performance. You had to perform for the people. That professional sports was also entertainment, and he was an extraordinary entertainer. Black ball itself was very different from Major League ball. The Negro League baseball always played at a faster pace, more daring, more base stealing, more fancy throws to the et cetera, to throw someone out. Why would you throw somebody out straight and overhand if you can throw it behind your head, behind your back, through your leg? On one occasion, a ball was hit back to Satchel Paige, a grounder. He's pitching. He caught the ball, bent over, and dusted off his shoe with his glove, and then threw it underhand to get the out. The fans love that kind of bravado. You had that all the time in Negro Leagues baseball. The stunting, the gags, people out in the outer field doing the cakewalk, etc. Shadow ball, where very often they start a game playing imaginary baseball. There's no real baseball. When somebody's pitching, there's no real baseball. Somebody's hitting, fielding, there's unreal baseball. No baseball. And in the end, it ends up in an argument at the plate. The fans love this. This is in an era when baseball was king by far. Satchel Paige played to the fans. Also, the longevity on the mound Paige would play for 4 decades. Another factor making him great was his ability to negotiate with the media. He was a darling of the media. One of the reasons for that was because he always made for good copy. Homespun philosopher, had always had great sayings, many of which are still with us today, part of the American vernacular. Don't look back. Something might be gaining on you. Heard that one. One of my favorite ones, as I get more and more gray hairs, Satchel Paige said, age is a matter of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. Right. And another one he would use, which I've used with certain academics, and used that Satchel Paige, Paige-ism saying. Satchel would say, it's not what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you know that just ain't so. He had that kind of brilliance of mind despite the 4th grade education. What he also gave to the public and to the press, he named his pitches, his bat dodger, his hesitation pitch, his whoopsie-doo pitch, his trouble ball, his b-ball, etc. And he was a notorious trash talker, right? Out of that African tradition, you trash talk. Oh, why are you bringing that bat up to the plate? It ain't nothing but wood. You know, he loved to make those kinds of statements about my greatness, his greatness on the mound. And the fans loved that. He more than once called in his outfield and had them sit behind him while he struck out the batters to end the inning. Absolutely incredible. More than once he did that. If anybody got a hit, it would have been a home run. And it was always Satchel Paige to the rescue, right? And his belief that the best take on the best. There's a classic showdown between him and Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson is the greatest hitter in the history of Negro League baseball. Some say the greatest hitter ever. Whites called Josh Gibson the Black Babe Ruth. And black folks said, no, you got it wrong. Babe Ruth is the white Josh Gibson. He hit home runs that have become nothing short of legends. In fact, there was one game where they were playing in Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. Gibson, who was playing for the Homestead Grays against the Chicago American Giants. They were doing a series, and he hit a home run, center field home run, that when it cleared center field, it was still going up and up. And people watched it fade away out in the distance. They forgot to even applaud as he's going around the bases. They're asking themselves, what planet is this guy from? And as the story goes, 3 days later, they were finishing up the series in Chicago this time. And both teams were on the field, you know, limbering up and doing some exercises. And one of the Chicago American Giants players heard a fan yell out, there's a ball coming. He looked up, a ball was falling, and he caught the ball. Now, what was going on? There was an umpire standing next to him, and he's looking, and they're looking at each other. What? And the umpire looks around, and he sees Josh Gibson over there talking to someone. Looks at the ball, looks at Gibson. Then finally, he makes a decision. He yells over at him, Gibson, you, Josh Gibson, you're out in Pittsburgh 3 days ago. Now, I know that's admittedly an exaggeration of his hitting ability, but you get the point. Satchel Paige in this game in 42 intentionally loads the bases, right, so he can pitch to Gibson for the final out. People said this was absolute madness. And John Buck O'Neill, who was there playing first base and also one of the managers for the Monarchs, who told me the details of the story, said he called me over and said, well, Nancy, you know what I'm going to do? I got to do this. We got to settle this thing once and for all between Josh and me. Josh, there's no question about, is the world's greatest hitter. I'm the world's greatest pitcher. We're going to settle this. Who's really the best? And so Josh Gibson came to the plate. Now, you can imagine what this did to the fans. They're hysterical, right? They can see exactly what's going on. Paige has loaded the bases, so for the final out, he can pitch against the deadliest hitter in Negro Leagues baseball. Not only pitches against him, but as I got the details of it, he's calling the pitches and telling Josh what's coming next. He tells him, Josh, the first one will be a fastball on the outside, but it's coming so fast, there's nothing you can do about it. Shoom, strike one. Then tells him where the second one is coming. Second one will be a fastball on the inside. It'll look a little low, but it'll be fine, but there's nothing you can do about it because it'll be faster than the other one. Shoot, strike two. And then he told him for the third one, he said, I'm not going to tell you where it's going because you're a great hitter and you could get lucky, but I'll tell you this, it will be a whole lot faster than the other two. Shoot, strike three. Struck him out. Gibson throws down his bat, goes off the field, and Paige strolls off the field leisurely with the fans going wild. He doesn't even tip his hat or anything, just looks ahead, strolls away, and the fans even get louder behind that. He was too cool to take a bow. But that was Satchel Paige, the daring, the putting it on the line, etc. Many will remember him for his greatness on the mound, yes. They will remember him as the oldest rookie in Major League Baseball. When he comes in and plays for Cleveland, he's 42 years of age in 1948. He's the first African American to start a game as pitcher. And when he started, he set the all-time attendance record for a night baseball game, over 72,000 fans. And a couple weeks later, when he started again, he broke that record because it was 78,000 fans in attendance. And 10 to 15,000 couldn't get in to the ballpark. Many will recall him as the oldest player in Major League game. At age 59, in 1965, he pitched 3 innings. He was indeed the first player from the Negro Leagues inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1971. That's the plaque inside there on the left. And on the right is a statue of Satchel Paige doing a high kick. And many pitchers in that era back then would do a high kick, particularly throwing a fastball. And that statue of him in the courtyard of the National Baseball Hall of Fame that was dedicated in 2006. He's a community and cultural icon. What I wanted you to see here is the mural there in the background. That mural was painted by an anonymous artist there in Kansas City, Missouri, right off Vine Street, which was like the street in Black Missouri. And in the front there, you have a portrait of Satchel Paige. That's him there, right there in front. And sitting to his right, that's his wife, Lahoma, Jane Paige. And holding the portrait, that's his daughter, Pamela Paige, and his son, Robert Paige. And I had asked them for a copy picture of the portrait itself, and they did me one better by giving me a shot of them and everybody else in front of this great mural. He was a community icon, but Satchel Paige was much more than that, than all of that. When you place him in historical context and appreciate his contribution to baseball and the African American struggle for equal rights. I want to talk a minute about the making of Satchel Paige. I think to understand any person and what they later become, I always like to start with their childhood to see if you can't pick up clues there. He had a very interesting, shall we say, childhood. Born in 1906 in Mobile, Alabama, family of 12, dirt poor. He was scrounging all of his life. He started scrounging when he was 5 years old, etc., particularly helping, finding discarded bottles, taking them in for the deposit on them, and then bringing home game, rabbits, squirrels, birds, vis-a-vis throwing rocks. He had that ability to throw rocks at uncanny accuracy and speed. And by age 9, he's regularly bringing home small game just with a handful of rocks. As he gets a little older, he hustles constantly at the L&N Depot, the Louisville and Nashville Depot, there in Mobile, carrying bags, carrying satchels, and that's where he gets his nickname, Satchel Paige. In a sense, though, you think he's born to defy. He's always at odds with his environment there in the Jim Crow South. And as a result of this, it's not that he's rebellious against his mother, his father in that regard. He's just rebellious and upset about his environment, his life, his restrictions. And he gets whoopings all the time. I didn't say whippings, I didn't say lickings, I said whoopings. He got those all the time. He would hear his mother tell him, go and fetch me a switch. And in the Black South, what that meant was to go out and bring back a tree branch, small tree branch, and it was used for a licking. And he would hear that constantly, go and fetch me a switch, go and fetch me a switch. And he said this, looking back at his childhood, you can read it there for yourself. I used to think she, that's his mother, Lula Paige, hit me because she didn't know how I felt. She didn't know how it was when they told me I couldn't swim where the white folks did. Then I realized maybe she did. She must have been chased away from the white man's swimming places. She must have gotten run off from the white man's stores and stands for just looking hungry at a fish. She must have heard those men yelling, "Get out of here, you no good nigger." She must have heard it. I guess she learned to live with it. And he did not learn to live with it. Satchel Paige becomes your quintessential bad Negro, as would be defined in the South. And the most vivid example of that are the rock wars he engages in. Many people say he ends up being sent to reform school because he stole some trinkets at a little store and so forth. That's absolute nonsense. What was happening is Satchel Paige was building a reputation as a bad Negro, particularly from these rock wars, because these rock wars were against local white boys. He attended the W.H. Council School, an all-black school, but not far from it was the all-white school, the Oakdale School. And whenever they would walk, he and some of his friends close to there, the white students, the white boys, would start throwing rocks at him. And so this went on for several occasions, and then finally Paige and his buddy started throwing back, and the rock wars were on. They actually started in 1917 and continue on into the eventful spring of 1918. Because prior to that, in these rock wars, Paige was careful how he even threw rocks. He would hit you. He was deadly accurate, but he'd hit you at a lower part of your body or your legs and so forth, and not try and hit you in the head. But that all changed spring 1918. He and his buddies were walking past again the Oakdale School, and a bunch of white boys open up on them with rocks, and they're fighting back and forth, and then reinforcements come in to the other side, and Paige and his buddies take off running, right, with the others pursuing behind him. But one of his friends is hit in the head and goes down. And it's at that point with his other friend trying to help him up that Paige turns around, picks up rocks, and starts throwing them. And he's throwing them and hitting people, but hitting them low, etc., but is not stopping them. And it's at that point that he begins to throw with full force and utterly bad intentions. And he's deadly accurate, hitting people dead in the head. Some who see the accuracy of the throws, they take flight, hide behind something. Others are brave, stand your ground, and they paid the price for that wrong decision. Still others, when they saw him getting ready to throw, tried ducking. And Paige learned how to hold his throw. In fact, he tells us later on, that's where he developed his hesitation pitch in these rock wars, etc., and then it would be dead on. And many of these kids, they left that day with big knots on their heads. Lucky someone didn't get their eye knocked out. But even more lucky is that they didn't go home and complain to their parents, because this could have been really disastrous. This is an absolute no-no in the Jim Crow South. Paige is not only putting himself at risk, he's putting the entire African-American community at risk. This would not be the first time, based on a whim or misinformation or somebody fighting back, that an entire community is laid waste. So he's putting the community at risk. In the end, he's brought before the authorities, and it is decided that he will be sent to reform school. Everyone believes that the person behind this is Frank Crenshaw, the sheriff there in Mobile, who had gone on record to say, quote, if a Negro is old enough to walk, he's old enough to go to jail. And Crenshaw meant this, and Alabama had a very fierce, terrible history of locking up young black males. Young black males, as young as age 10, were being sentenced to adult prisons, terms in adult prisons. And that was the fate for Satchel Paige, right? If it hadn't been for the intervention of others, and particularly the intervention of these two women. This one in particular, Aletha Young. And Paige only ever mentions her as Mrs. Meany. She was his teacher, and that's all he ever called her. And it took the longest to find out who Mrs. Meany was. Who's this Mrs. Meany that he so hates? And one of the reasons he hated her is when he would miss school, she in fact reported that truancy to his mother. And you know what he heard then. Go and fetch me a switch, right? Exactly. The reality is she was not mean, neither was she married, Miss Aletha Young. And in fact, she had the reputation of one of the most beloved teachers in Black Mobile, Alabama. She was trying to save Satchel Paige. And what we find is, indeed, she met with Sheriff Crenshaw, and she makes the argument, don't send him to prison, send him to reform school, because she knows that reform school. She's been involved in the making of this school. And when you look at this history and look at the work of the Alabama Federation of Colored Women's Club, it's important for a number of levels, a number of reasons, not just because it helps Satchel Paige, but it also puts to rest this notion that black women in the South did not work to advance their own civil rights, their own liberation. Certainly that's not the case. The Alabama Federation of Colored Women's Club, there were 31 of these clubs throughout Alabama. And nationwide, these clubs, part of the National Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, are all over the country, including the South. And Aletha Young is a good friend and co-worker with Cornelia Bowen. Cornelia Bowen is the founder of the Mount Meigs Colored Institute that becomes, in fact, the Reform School itself. And these women had got together in promoting the idea of making this a reform school for black males, not because they hate them, but because they love them. And they say, we got to save our own black males. These are children, and they used the term back then, at risk. They need our intervention, right? Or they're going to be sent off to adult prisons. And Ms. Young, in making the case that he should be sent to Mount Meigs, knew exactly who was there. Her friend and fellow worker in the Alabama Federation of Colored Women, Cornelia Bowen. Somebody needs to do a biography of Cornelia Bowen. She's a member of the first graduating class from Tuskegee Institute. Tuskegee, Alabama, graduates in 1887. She has none other than Booker T. Washington as one of her teachers. And not only that, she's a firm believer in the reformation abilities of baseball, that sport can be used to reform young folks, and young men in particular. She gains this idea from her close working relationship with the Carlisle Indian Institute. Some of you have heard of the Carlisle Indian Institute in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. That's the institute that had as its head of athletics and sports a person by the name of Pop Warner, like Pop Warner football, baseball, Pop Warner cheerleader. And that's the institution that had one of the greatest athletes that ever lived, produced there, Jim Thorpe, right? And there's a close relationship here as she's trying to learn about and to use the power of baseball in particular to reform young men. For the longest, we thought that Paige just goes to this school. He later said that's where he learned how to pitch. And people thought, oh, he's just playing around, throwing, and so forth. No, he's actually trained how to pitch by Moses Davis. And do me one favor, if nothing else. There continues to be this misinformation that somebody by the name of Bird taught Satchel Paige how to pitch. That's absolutely nonsense. First of all, there's nobody by the name of Bird at Mount Meigs. Never has been. In fact, there's nobody by the name of Bird within 30 miles of Mount Meigs. But nevertheless, this story persists. And even more to the point, it was suggested that the coach who taught him how to pitch was a white teacher. Well, that's interesting because there were no white teachers at Mount Meigs. All the teachers there, the entire teaching staff, only 6 people, they're all black, right? No, the person who taught him how to pitch, and I wanted you to see this blown up, that's from Cornelia Bowen's stationery. And the person third down on the right, you can see it more clearly, Moses Davis. Mr. Moses Davis, who's a minister there, a local black church in Waugh, Alabama, small town that Mount Meigs is a part of. And it's Moses Davis who teaches the boys baseball with the complete support of Cornelia Bowen. It is Moses Davis who gets their first baseball uniforms. And he gets it from the J.A. Murray Sporting Good Company on Dexter Avenue in Montgomery. And he gets a fine discount because he uses the influence of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church to help him in getting a good deal. That church, the oldest black Baptist church in Montgomery, founded in 1877, has a direct connection with the school. They send money to the school, they help them with their baseball uniforms, etc. And if you fast forward in the history of the Civil Rights Movement, that same Dexter Avenue Baptist Church is the same church in 1955 that has an assistant pastor by the name of Martin Luther King Jr., who then gets together with Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon and Fred Shuttlesworth and formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. And of course, as they launched the bus boycott, Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, there's this connection. Satchel Paige, without even knowing, his life is intertwined with that of the struggle for civil rights, even when he does not know it. When he hits the road after being released from the Mount, he's released in 1923. I love this particular shot of Mount Meigs done by a group of visitors checking out the school, and they took this shot, and they don't name who are the boys in the photo. And every time I look at it, I said, I bet that one right there, I bet that's Satchel Paige. It was meant to be that way, that somehow I'd get this photo from 1923, the date of this photo, and I bet that's him out of the 300-something other boys on the at Mount Meigs. Well, wishful thinking, right? But once he's released, he starts his career in baseball. He's a master navigator, particularly in how to outsmart or get past Jim Crow and the notorious hotbed. You're a Negro League ball player and you're on the road, you're staying at flea-bitten hotels, and you become meals for bed bugs and chinches and so forth. It's not exactly a glamorous life. How to avoid that? Right. One of the tools that's so important to Satchel Paige is one that we constantly overlook and need to give more credit to, and that's the automobile. The automobile. Some of you will recall that in the Montgomery bus boycott, how the boycotters were able to compensate for not riding the buses, right? Remember, they formed carpools. They used cars. They formed sort of their impromptu cab company to get people back and forth to work, etc. Why they didn't continue that later on, I don't know. But the automobile has been very important in the African-American struggle to overcome Jim Crow. And Satchel Paige is a master at this because the car, as he tells us, it allowed him to be independent. You'd pack a basket of food, put that in the trunk, right? He had a little Coleman stove that he'd use to cook with. He carried fishing gear in the trunk of his car, a blanket, right? A thermos with water, and then later on more lively beverages than that. Then he'd park by a lake or a stream, right? And that allowed him, he could fish, etc. And when he got sleepy, he took his blanket and slept in the back of the car, avoiding the bed bugs at those flea-bitten hotels and the rest. And the next morning, when he woke up, he could freshen himself up in the lake or go for a swim. I know it was rustic, but it allowed him, it showed you his intelligence in trying to overcome Jim Crow. I have to mention to you, too, as well, in all fairness, Satchel Paige was a notorious driver. He sped all the time. He was known to blow out car engines, and he received so many tickets for speeding. It was outrageous. In fact, one story told of Paige blasting through this small town. He was going at such a speed when the police finally did catch up with him. They took him to the local magistrate, and the local magistrate said, for that kind of speeding, we're charging you $40. $40 was a lot of money back then. So Paige reached in his pocket and gave the judge $80, to which the judge said, no, the fine is $40, not $80, to which Paige responded, I'll be coming back this way. Right? That was Satchel Paige. Now others say, well, you know, Josh, the fighter Jack Johnson told the same story. That's absolutely true, but the same thing happened to Paige, and he told the story much better. Buck O'Neil, who was in fact made by J.L. Wilkinson, the owner of the Kansas City Monarchs, he was assigned to ride with Paige, try and slow him down a bit and make sure, though, he got the game safely. And after a couple experiences of riding with Paige, he went to J.L. Wilkinson and he told him, you can fire me, I'm not riding with him again. He said not only was he speeding this last time, but he was speeding and going the wrong way down a one-way street. And he said when the police finally stopped us, they said, hey, you're not only speeding, you know you're going the wrong way down a one-way street? And he said, and Satchel told him, I'm only going one way. Right? He got another ticket. Even when not on the road, Birmingham itself was contested territory. Every aspect of African-American life, in fact, Martin Luther King would later say it was the most segregated city in America, and I used to joke, tell him to come to Chicago, and when he finally did come to Chicago, he said, yeah, Chicago might be as bad as some of these other places. The black Birmingham Barons had a rich tradition of baseball there, to say the least. And they often barnstormed, and thinking that gave relief, and certainly you're traveling, seeing the world. In one particular case, they were traveling, a barnstorming game in Galveston, Texas, for a Juneteenth celebration. And it was interesting to see the world they had to try and overcome. When they arrived at the game site, playing another black team, of course, they found out that the local sheriff was part owner of the team they were going to play, and he obviously had some money bet on the game. And he told Paige and the rest of the Barons that he wanted to meet with them for a second and call them over, and he told them, and I quote, if you niggas beat my niggas, all you niggas going to jail, right? And so Paige said that was an interesting situation. And what the Barons did is they trailed throughout the entire game into the bottom of the ninth, rallied, beat the team, jumped on their buses and their cars, and flew out of there. Right. Statements about black manhood, statements about trying to overcome Jim Crow. And then back in Birmingham, they played at Richwood Field, the oldest ballpark in America. Richwood Field was established in 1910, right? The problem with Richwood Field, like so many of the Negro Leagues teams, you play in these fields, except you rented them, you didn't own them, and most of the deals called for that you had to have the concessionaires that went with the field, white concessionaires, and the price of food and everything else went up for the blacks. They got the worst of toilet facilities, usually outhouses somewhere, etc. But probably the worst of the experience at Richwood Field was the announcer for the games. At Richwood Field, you had to use the same announcer who announced for the White Barons games for, in fact, the Black Barons games, because they didn't want blacks to use the amplification system. Some say, well, they think probably the blacks would poison it or contaminate it somehow. So you had to use the same announcer. The announcer for Baron baseball games was a man by the name of Eugene Connor, who was known to all of his friends as Bull Connor. And this is long before he would become sort of the perfect example of racism in the South when he became Commissioner of Public Safety years later in Birmingham. I love the title, Commissioner of Public Safety. The police force, fire department were all under him. And it was he who directed the police to use all force necessary against black demonstrators. And we have it on videos, folks being beaten, attack dogs being sicked on them, hit with high-pressure water hoses, cattle prods used against them, thrown into jail, pregnant women dragged down the street, young kids hit in the head. That's Bull Connor. But long before he was that, he was Eugene Bull Connor, the baseball announcer. And he got his nickname Bull because he was full of it, and because his bellicose ability to ramble on and announcing baseball games. Some of his announcing of the Black Barons baseball games just defy all human decency. Today we have playing 2 nigger teams. On this nigger team starting at first base, etc. Look at that nigger run. Fast as a little monkey. Aren't they something? Did you see that catch? Only an ape could make that kind of catch. Pitching is this great nigger pitcher, Nigger Paige, Satchel Paige. In fact, Satchel Paige, that's in the quote. Satchel Paige would later say that he heard nigger pitcher so much in various games he played in. He said that could have been his other nickname. His nickname could have been Satchel, or Go and Fetch Me a Switch, or a Nigger Pitcher. Right? But you think of, when I talk to folks about how did you survive that, they said, well, we didn't hear Bull Connor. We cut him off. Right? You didn't hear him. They said, no, we were not going to let him spoil our day at the ballpark. We're dressed to the nines. The players are playing well. We're having a good time. Most of the blacks would pack a picnic basket, and come to the game to avoid those high prices, overcharging you at the concession stands, etc., and enjoy the game. Think about the mental toughness and the resiliency that demonstrates. More to the point, black baseball players are directly involved in the struggle for civil rights. The Negro Leaguers are active in the anti-lynching crusade. For example, at the end of the 1934 East-West All-Star Game, and the East-West All-Star Game is the most important of games in Negro League baseball. You have 40, 50,000 people at these games, usually in Comiskey Park in Chicago, way outdrawing the major league games, etc. And it's particularly at the end of the 34 one that they get together and are pumping in money to help the Scottsboro Nine, the Scottsboro boys, and their retrial in Scottsboro, Alabama. These boys who have been falsely accused of raping 2 white women. And the head of this effort is Bill Bojangles Robinson. And most people think of Bill Bojangles Robinson as, well, the great tap dancer, the individual who was in so many of those Shirley Temple movies during the 1930s. And if you're following the news, you know that Shirley Temple just recently passed away. And she and Bojangles would do these tap dance routines that he taught her. And she said he was her first real teacher of any kind of dance, etc. She also talked about how he looked out for her and told her, working the girl too hard, stop it, etc. But most think of him as the great dancer, and they forget the fact that he was part owner of the Black Yankees baseball team and a fierce defender of African American youth, pumping money in, time, effort, and particularly on cases involving lynching and in the anti-lynching crusade, taking up funds that Paige and other Negro League players contribute to help the Scottsboro boys and their cause. Happening right at the same time is the Claude Neal lynching in the great state of Florida, which Walter White, the head of the NAACP, said is one of the most gruesome crimes in human history he'd ever heard of, where Claude Neal is just totally mutilated and then burned alive, then lynched, etc. I mean, his toes were cut off and hands, fingers cut off, sold as souvenirs. It's just people punching out his eyes. You can't, it's so gruesome you can't even repeat all the details. And this outrages Negro League ball players, as it does much of the decent nation. And they're pumping money into the NC2A, into anti-lynching campaigns, to say the least. Negro League owners are directly involved in the anti-lynching crusade. One of the most outspoken of the Negro League owners is Effa Manley. That's a shot of Effa Manley with some of the other Negro League owners there. In fact, in the early period, she's the only woman owner of a Negro League team, the Newark Eagles, and she's very feisty. She's talking about, you know, where's our black pride and what we've got to do for the community, and she's a huge supporter of NAACP. Pumps money into them, helps them to keep open there when they had their office in New York and on Fifth Avenue. In fact, the sign that would hang outside the NAACP office there in New York saying a man was lynched today in the South, she personally paid for those signs. She was a dedicated crusader and challenging black men to be more manly. And she told Satchel Paige, you need to be even more black. She was that kind of person. What's doubly fascinating about her is that she was not black. She was genetically a white woman. Her mother was white, and her biological father was white. Her mother later married a black man, so her stepfather, etc., and she would live in Harlem. And her mother told her that you're really a white woman. And she chooses to live her life as a black woman. And I've seen videos of her, and I've heard her speak, and I just thought she was a light-skinned black woman. I mean, sound like a sister, wear clothes like a sister, love soul food. Most of her friends were black, etc. She's a white woman, which tells you something very interesting about the artificial construct of race, right? Satchel Paige, in terms of, I think, his most important contribution in baseball to bringing down the barriers of Jim Crow was when he played out west in the California Winter League. The California Winter League, which started back in 1899, this is where star black players would play against star white players. You could get Negro League teams playing against Major League teams. I mentioned to you Dizzy Dean. Dizzy Dean and Satchel Paige had a lot of these black-white barnstorming gigs and made a lot of money doing so, going against one another, white team versus black team. And what was happening here is that blacks, whites, others, you're treated to a great game of baseball, but what people were also noting was that these Negro League players were every bit as good as these Major League players. And Satchel Paige, just about better than all. That's saying something very profound. It's another way of pushing for one's rights as a human being, saying I'm an equal, etc. Paige was doing it from the pitcher's mound. There are all kinds of ways to protest. As we might say, as he said, in fact, doing his best to strike out Jim Crow. That's a shot with him and Dizzy Dean, and they were buddies. They were pals, as they like to say. And no better example of this impact is the 1935 Bismarck Semi-Pro Championship team. It is indeed America's first integrated professional baseball team. They're in Bismarck. And what's fascinating, you can count it for yourself. You can see all the blacks, right? You can see Vernon Johnson there with his hand on Satchel Paige's shoulder, right in the back. To the far right, your far right standing, that's double duty Radcliffe. To your far left standing, that's Hilton Smith, who I think is the last Negro League player inducted in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, 2001. There have been about 18 now, Satchel Paige being the first. And of the white players, none are more important than getting this record straight. Well, two. In the middle there, the gentleman with the regular clothes, that's Neil Churchill, who's the owner-manager and put the team together. But then to the end, I would try to point to it, but I don't think my pointer will show on there. It won't show on there. But on the, to your far left, bottom row, just Joe Desderado. And Desderado left us a very good record of this team and what they did together. I mean, this was a team. This is not integration where you say we got a one black on our team, so it's integrated. They have a lot of blacks on their team. Not only that, when they would come up to a restaurant that said we don't serve blacks, the entire team left, right? This happened on more than one occasion. As Joe Desderado said, you won't feed all of us, then none of us will eat here. When they went to hotels, you won't accommodate all of us because we're mixed and have some black. We're not staying there. And in fact, not only is it the first integrated team, it is the first team where blacks and whites actually roomed together. Because there were occasions where hotels would take them, but they only had a few rooms, and it meant that players would have to double up and triple up. And Joe Desderado said many times Satchel Paige was his roommate, and said these folks would spend half the night telling jokes, cracking jokes back and forth, and so forth. So indeed, this is the first documented team where blacks and whites actually room together. Paige was very proud of having been a part of the Bismarck team. In fact, Double Duty Radcliffe told me that was his proudest moment, being a member of that team. And you can see what Paige said about it. I'd cracked another little chink in Jim Crow with the championship Bismarck team. They were virtually unstoppable with the combination of talent they had. Negro League players participated in the Double V campaign during World War II. The Double V, freedom over there and over here, victory over there and over here, right? Let's end racism over there and let's end it here. The Double V campaign that Negro League ball players and owners all bought into. Many, of course, going and serving in the military service, and others staying home, but doing what you could for the war cause. So what are the coming reintegrating of Major League Baseball? Because Paige is paving the way, right? He's disproving this notion that blacks are not capable of playing Major League Baseball on the West Coast, his barnstorming, etc. Paige is interviewed in 1942 on the question of the integration of baseball. And he says, which is very interesting, because I've read all the accounts of what he actually said, and it's clear to me that he had serious doubts about the integration of baseball. And he says, because what will happen is, he says, and I think what they want our fans. They want our fan base. We're outdrawing the major leagues in games. We're packing them in, etc. We think they want our fans. He says, if you want to integrate, take whole teams, whole black all-star teams into the majors. And another point Paige said, if they were really interested in increasing the talent of their teams, they won't just maybe it someday take 1 or 2 players, because we have bunches of players who are good enough to play in Major League Baseball. Effa Manley's warning was even more to the point. Leave it to Miss Manley. She said this, after particularly Jackie Robinson is signed on with the Montreal farm team of the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1945, which meant that if he did well there, he might be called up to the team, the Brooklyn Dodgers. She said this, "The moment Robinson puts on a Dodgers uniform, you can begin counting the days to the death of the Negro Leagues." And Buck O'Neill, Double Duty Radcliffe, Cool Papa Bell, Buck Leonard were a few of the many Negro League players who were questioning what integration might mean in terms of its negative impact on their livelihood. In one of my interviews, in fact, the last interview with Buck O'Neill, this one was in 2005. In fact, he died the following year in 2006 at age 94. He said this, "We should have, in fact, supported our Negro Leagues," and he went on to say that they should have done what Satchel has said, and that was to take whole teams into the majors, or at least make the Negro Leagues part of the farm system of the majors. But I want you to hear just 3 minutes of what he also said in my interview with him. It starts off with me saying stuff. I think you can recognize my voice even back then. But then there's Buck O'Neill, because he takes it a step further. So listen up.
If we open up that and our own people, rather than, being in an environment we control much more, rather go over here, and they see this as the big time and the rest, and I think that the integration in a sense killed the Negro Leagues.
It did. That was when Frank Nigga signed Jackie Robinson, that was the death knell for Negro League baseball. Yeah, that was the death knell. But not only that, that was the death knell of black businesses in this country. See, right in this building, no, but right down the corner, Streets Hotel. Anybody black that came here, I don't care if your mother's garment, you had to spread the streets on that show. This was big business. This was business, the whole thing. New York City. Yeah, we didn't stay in Times Square. We stayed in Harlem.
That's right.
And the man that owned
Teresa and all of that.
And the small hotel, the small was black. The bar, the man that owned the bar in the small hotel was black. The woman that owned the restaurant in the small hotel was black. All of this was black-owned business. See? And small hotel. This is where actually the musicians would go to live. That's where they stayed. Yeah. So then that was the same thing. Washington D.C., Chicago, all of these were these black things, but after integration. Now, Mr. Street, he couldn't compete with the Mule Bar Hotel. You understand? Yeah, he couldn't compete with that. So we go out of that business. Right up the street there's the supermarket. The black man owned the supermarket. Now,
the same thing happened in Miami. Overtown, that era, and we were doing work on that with a gentleman down there who was one of the leading impresarios during that period and bringing in the acts. And they were all playing, of course, in South Beach. Yeah. And then they were coming over to the St. John's.
That's right.
Places like that. And that's where the great music was. And had people were coming in. But we were looking later at the whole destruction of Overtown. When they bring in I-95 and just tear it up. But particularly when the so-called laws of segregation came down. I mean, you look at Overtown before that, we saw barber shops, beautician parlors, cleaners, restaurants, hotels.
I remember the Sir John. We stayed in the Sir John. Here come the little black entertainer, Sammy Davis and his uncle and daddy and them, but his uncle and daddy, but they were all going to stay at the Sir John. But Frank Sinatra said, Sammy ain't going to stay at the Sir John. Sammy Davis gonna stay on the beach with us. That was a great act. Right. But his dad and them still stayed over at Sir John, Mary Elizabeth, been on there. Yeah, that's right.
So I wanted you to hear that portion about his comments, because Robert was asking me this question earlier, and most of the Negro League players I interviewed had real doubts about the benefits of integration and the integration of baseball, because it destroyed the Negro Leagues. So I think this raises a lot of interesting questions. Was integration the course? Or should have been empowerment, or what? But these kinds of questions, I think, come to the forefront when you factor in Satchel Paige and Negro Leagues baseball into a rethinking of the civil rights movement. So let me stop at that point and then open it up for any questions you might have. Any questions? Comments? Just raise your hand. So thorough, no questions? Who? Oh, okay, here.
I was remembering when you spoke about how long Satchel Paige's career was, and he was over 60 years, almost 60 years old in Major League Baseball. Did he? Do you know approximately how many seasons he was in professional Major League Baseball? Yeah,
he played 2 seasons for Cleveland, 48, 49, and he played 3 with the Browns, 51, 2, and 3 with the Browns. So it's a total of actually 5. He then, that last shot of him pitching 3 innings in 1965, he was just shortly on within the Kansas City Athletics, and he pitched 3 innings. So he has a career that spans, just a tremendous amount of time, not just in this country, but abroad as well, playing all through Latin America and the Caribbean. We don't have time to get into all of that, but that kind of impact.
Thank you.
I have a question here.
Why do you think Jackie Robinson got so much more credit than Satchel Paige in regards to integrating and baseball itself?
I think that, Jackie was the first. I mean, that's where the focus will be. Coming into to the majors, always the first gets that kind of attention. And I think in the case of Robinson, rightly so. I mean, if he were here, I'm sure he would tell you exactly what I've said. He played on the Kansas City Monarchs for a short period of time before Branch Rickey brought him into the Dodger organization. He was the first. But people like Satchel Paige and the other great Negro League players, they paved the way by, in fact, showing constantly that blacks can play at that level, can excel at that level. And you won't get these riots because blacks and whites are at the baseball field together. And that happened on so many occasions, no riots at these games. And they were packing them in, large audiences, which the majors were taking notice of. In fact, Kenneth Shaw Landis, baseball commissioner, tried to stop the barnstorming out west in the California Winter League because he thought it was bad for Major League Baseball. And some say he thought it was bad because many of the Major League Baseball players were getting whipped out there by these Negro League players. Well, part of it too is the money involved. And the players wanted to do this. The white players, black, they wanted to do it. White ball players weren't paid like they're paid today. They needed the money. You could be a heck of a player and you're making $5,000 a year. Right? That's better than the average person, but we often forget. Jackie Robinson signed for $5,000 a year, his original contract. I mean, there are going to be very few like Babe Ruth, in his heyday, who, in 1929, when he made that famous contract of, $80,000, and that was more than the President of the United States Herbert Hoover was paid. He was paid $75,000. They said, "How do you feel? You're making more than the president." And he says, "Well, I had a better year than the president." But like the mega salaries today, it just doesn't even equate. But Robinson gets the credit, and one of the interesting things in my conversation with Sharon Robinson, I didn't even get to finish the question. I started to ask her, I said, "Do you think, looking at your father's life, that the integration of baseball," and she just cut me off. She said, "Yes. I think the integration of baseball cost him his life. I think it tore away at him and so forth. He developed the diabetes, all the stress," she said, because he kept it inward. And he died at age 53. Yeah, and she says she's convinced it was the stress of all that. It had to be really rough. The movie 42 doesn't come close to the reality of it. We have a question there in the back.
Did Satchel Paige keep up his flashy show even when he got to the major leagues, or did he have to keep that tame? Exactly right.
No, he didn't keep up his flashy show in the major leagues. The only thing he did that reminded people of, he trash talked constantly. Now that's in fact, when he didn't trash talk, he didn't pitch well. When he started trash talking, he could pitch well. He needed that, but no double windmill wind-ups and all of that. And by that time, the high kick, ball players are not using it anymore. Can you imagine trying to pitch a whole game, kicking your leg up that high? You'd be worn out in the first inning, right? So no, he basically doesn't do that. But he's great for the press. He's great for the fans, giving interviews, giving these Paige-isms, Satchel-isms constantly to the press, making predictions, rules of life, how to relax, soothe the stomach. He goes on and on and on. Yes, right here.
How would you compare the integration of the major leagues to the integration of, say, the public school systems, and I guess in the broader context of the civil rights movement?
Well, that's an interesting, very interesting comparison. Well, what's interesting about, when you get a chance, take a look at Derek Bell's book, Silent Covenants, and where he looks at the sort of post-Brown decision America and argues that, the schools are not integrated. That's largely reality, particularly at the lower echelons rather than colleges and universities. Communities still tend to be segregated. The most segregated institution in America is the church. Go into any church, you usually find one group, whether it's blacks, whites, one group. And Bell makes the argument that what should have been done was to pump money into equal, of the separate but equal clause, pump money into making it equal. In other words, pump more money into the black schools and so forth. Make it actually equal, he said, because the rest doesn't work. But it's when I'm interviewing these black ball players, and you could hear it in the words, see it in the words of Mrs. Manley and Satchel Paige and Buck O'Neill. When Paige in 42 makes his statement, sounds like he's critical of integration. It is the black press that jumps all over him. It is black fans who jump all over him. The man retracts. I really didn't mean it like that, etc. When, in the case of Jackie Robinson, you were asking, when Jackie Robinson goes to the Dodgers, he's taken from the Kansas City Monarchs. They get no compensation. They just come in and take him, etc. And J.L. Wilkinson writes saying, and it becomes a news item, he says, we should be compensated for taking our ball players and so forth. And the press picks up on that, and I'm talking about the black press. They condemn him for saying, it sounds like you're anti-integration. And such a flood of condemnation, Wilkinson backs off. We didn't, fine, we wish him all the best. And that's the reality. of it. In terms of these kinds of thoughts about should you develop a black business and so forth, this was not at the forefront. It seemed to be a focus on integration, quite frankly. Others will say, I want my human rights, but is being served as at a lunch counter, or do you want something more than that? Do you want to open your own restaurant? Right? You want to start your own bus service, your own cab service? These discussions were not really at the forefront. And you see it in the question of the schools. And so I don't have to tell you what the situation is in the public schools. You can sum it up in 2 words: a disaster. Wish I had something nicer to report, but other questions? We still have a couple minutes left. I zoomed over a lot, and you saw me cut some things out so we could have time for discussion. If you're not going to ask some questions, I'm going to add one back in. I cut out when Satchel Paige is riding off to reform school on the L&N train in Louisville and Nashville. Train going to reform school, scared to death, young kid. There's 4 or 5 of them, and a local minister is escorting them to Mount Meigs, which is about 180 miles up north of Mobile, across from Montgomery, and it's about, 15, 20 miles from Montgomery, Alabama. But what's so symbolic about that train ride, if he had a crystal ball, if he had had a crystal ball and could have looked forward, that same L&N train will be at the forefront of the assault against the Plessy decision. Because in 1944, William Steele, who's a black fireman working for the L&N, out of Mobile, etc., he's summarily fired and replaced by a white worker. Because his job had been basically a Negro job, as they call a fireman, because with the steam engines you were shoveling coal into the boiler. It was a dirty, filthy, quote unquote, Negro job. But they switched to diesel engines. And so now all the fireman has to do is push a button, sit down, enjoy the ride. It becomes an easy job. And so now others want the job. So he's fired and replaced by a white worker. He sues. And the lawyer who takes his case is Charles Hamilton Houston. Some of you have heard that name, who takes his case. And they go through the Alabama courts and they lose. Alabama rules against him. And it's taken all the way to the Supreme Court. Steele versus the L&N and the locomotive union there as well. And Charles Hamilton Houston wins. And that particular case, if you look at Justice Frank Murphy's writing the majority opinion, it is a blistering condemnation of the rule of law in Alabama. He says when it comes to the Negro, there is no justice there whatsoever. But that case is important, that 1944 case, because that's a part of the body of laws that Charles Hamilton Houston uses in his assault against Plessy versus Ferguson. As you know, he dies and doesn't see the end result, but that's one of the cases his student, Thurgood Marshall, takes in the NAACP Defense Fund as part of the body of law of precedents that helped them take on Plessy versus Ferguson and win in 1954. And I've often said if Paige had only had a crystal ball, if he'd had a crystal ball, he would have known too that the reform school is going to be good for him, and that reform school will list 2 people as great claim to fame. Lonnie Holley, right, who's a well-known artist, and Satchel Paige. And I say there too, I say the same for Babe Ruth, because Babe Ruth went to a reform school, St. Mary's, outside of Baltimore. It was a reform school, industrial school of sorts. And that school, when it lists its 2 most successful cases, they list George Herman Ruth, Babe Ruth, and they list Alsa Yolson. who was a Jewish kid there, who later changes his name to Al Jolson, becomes one of the most famous entertainers of all time. So, you know, sometimes reform schools can reform. Who wants the final question? There you go. Last question.
You were talking about how when black men integrated into the major leagues expected them to kind of tame the showiness and personality of their game and their personalities. And do you think that had like not just effect on the death in the Negro Leagues, but also a change in the personality of black men or their sense of identity?
I see what you mean. And it was a conflicted role. When Satchel Paige went to Cleveland, he's the second black recruiter there. Larry Doby, who's now on the postage stamp, Larry Doby was the first. And they never got along that well because Larry Doby was much more stoic. You know, Paige was flamboyant, you know, had been a star and all that. I mean, Paige is cooking catfish in his room, you know, and Doby's just appalled by this. You know, Paige is bringing catfish, watermelon, whatever, and Doby's, oh my God, you know, etc. But very different styles. And and there's one point where Doby tells him, you know, you can't do that Negro League kind of thing here. Doby had played in the Negro Leagues as well. He played for Effa Manley, the Newark Eagles. Right, and she finally did get some compensation for Larry Doby being taken by Cleveland, but she's dealing with Bill Veeck. That's a different personality. So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, you could do things in the rooms, in the locker room, etc., but you had to sort of toe the line when it came to actually playing and on the field. Wasn't going to be any shadow ball. But for Bill Veeck, I mean, he was entertainer number one. I mean, he had fireworks out there and midgets and halftime and bands, and he invented, you know, the exploding scoreboard and all of that sort of thing. He loved the flamboyant, but he would do it at certain times, but you know, etc. There were episodes where Paige and other ball players were playing instruments. Paige is playing a ukulele and so forth in the 6th inning stretch and so forth, but control. But once you play, it's all serious business, no clowning around when you're playing. When he came here, and I'll let you go, but when Beck took over the Miami Marlins and was going to build them, one of his, in the first games, to build the community spirit and get people out to the games. His first games, he got Satchel Paige and flew him in by helicopter and landed him in the middle of the field. And then Paige got out and went and sat in a rocking chair for the rest of the game. He loved these kinds of stunts, and it brought out fans. Okay, well, we'll see you next time at our regular meeting place. Thank you.
New episodes of Lectures in History will start in January. Next week, you can hear 3 episodes about women's history. Remember, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends, share it with a neighbor, or post it on social media. Also, follow Lectures in History so you never miss an episode.